Welcome to another video lecture by Utkalp Digital Classes. I am your tutor Raghav Chaturvedi, and today we are going to look at wave optics. The topics that I'll be discussing today include Huygens principle and wavefront, analysis of interference, and Young's double slit experiment. To begin this unit, we'll talk about the different theories of light. These include the Newton's theory, the Huygens theory, Planck's theory, Maxwell's theory, and de Broglie's theory. The two theories that I'll talk to you about are the Newton's theory and the Huygens theory. So, what does the Newton's theory say in brief? It says that there are extremely minute, very light and elastic particles known as corpuscles that make up light. They travel with the speed of light, which was given to be 3 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second in vacuum. It also says that these have the rest mass to be 0. It also says that they travel in straight lines. Rest mass is 0. They travel in straight lines and they are invisible. So when they fall on our eyes, we get the sensation of light. This can easily explain several phenomena such as reflection, refraction, rectilinear propagation, and existence of energy in light. But the Newton's theory, it fails to take into account interference, diffraction, polarization, TIR, which is total internal reflection, and refraction, or double refraction. In order to explain these things, we move on to the next theory, which is the wave theory of light. Okay, what does the wave theory of light says? It first of all, uh, it's based on the theory given by Huygens. So Huygens first of all proposed a medium, a hypothetical medium known as ether. Okay, and what was the property of this medium? This medium was isotropic and it was perfectly elastic and massless. Isotropic, perfectly elastic and massless. Huygens theorem or Huygens principle is basically a geometrical principle. What this essentially says is you can consider, for example, if I consider a surface of water, what we had is if we dropped a ball in the surface, we got it gave rise to ripples or waves in the 2D plane. What these ripples meant were these were basically vibrations. All these were different vibrations that were propagating, which we read about in the chapter on waves. Now uh, we similarly have a condition where you have a light source in 3 dimensions, okay, and then it propagates its energy in the form of a wavefront. And how does the wavefront propagate? First of all, these are all disturbances. So, well, let's look at this diagram here. You have a source. Source will emit wavefronts in all directions. So, if this is the source, it emits a wavefront like this. So, at let time t is equal to t naught, the wavefront is looking like this. Then what happens at a time, let's say t plus delta t, what will happen is the wavefront would have propagated to some new distance, let's say this one. And how is this propagation done? So every point on this wave, let me zoom this in. So every point on the wavefront, let's say this, every point that is there, it gives rise to wavelets. So every point will act as a new source and there will be energy being propagated in all directions due to every point. Okay, so every point will lead to these small wavelets. So you should be comfortable with the notation. So all these are small wavelets coming out of these seconds, these points. These wavelets are nothing but new disturbances. Okay, and this entire blue thing is your wavefront. Now what will happen is he proposed that the intensity of this energy propagation in the backward direction is 0, and in the forward direction it's maximum. What does this mean? If this was my secondary particle and this was the wavelet or the energy being propagated, okay, then he says that in the backward direction there is no energy. Okay, so the propagation is only in the forward direction. So all these three lines, they don't exist, only the forward direction exists. Now if I consider all the wavelets on a wavefront and I draw a line that is tangent to all of them, then this line will give me the new wavefront at a later time t plus t prime at t is equal to t plus delta t. So this is how it will keep on propagating. Every point of the wavefront will become the source of a secondary wavelet, and it will emit secondary wavelets in all directions with the speed of light. This is the entire basis of our theory, and this from here itself ray and the ray theory comes into the picture. So first of all, you should note what a wavefront is. We have already talked to you about the wavefront in the chapter on waves, but again, my wavefront is nothing but the locus of all the particles vibrating in the same phase. Locus of all particles vibrating in the same phase. It's quite easy to understand this concept. So if this is my source, and let's say this is the wavefront that is corresponding to, let's say, as the antinodes. So we want to see how this antinode propagates with time. Okay, so after time, let's say small time t, it might reach here. At later time t, the same wavefront reaches different points. So we are concerned about how the wavefronts are being propagated. So as you can see, there can be different shapes of these wavefronts. So the shape of the wavefront will depend upon the shape of the light source, which is giving rise to the wavefront. On the basis of this, I can have three types of wavefront. I'll just talk to you about these three types which are prominent. Uh, so first of all, the wavefront of all particles of the medium vibrating in the same phase at a given instant is known as the wavefront. We're looking at the different shapes that are possible. So the first one is the spherical wavefront. If your point source is a light source, the point source is acting as the light source, so you know that it will emanate energy in all directions. So for the first one, my wavefront will be something like this. So boundary of this, now each point on this boundary will act as its own source and create all these disturbances. So you will get a new wavefront, something like this. Same thing will happen again and again, and you will keep on getting spherical wavefronts, or the wavefronts will propagate in this way. Okay. The diagram and shape of the wavefront is given to you. You should also note that the variation that exists between the amplitude of the wavefront and the distance. So you can see that the amplitude of the wavefront goes down with distance or with the radial distance from here. So if this was my point source, this was my wavefront. So at time, let's say this is at time t is equal to 0. Let's say time is equal to some t. The amplitude will be lesser as compared to the amplitude over here. Similarly, because intensity varies with amplitude square, so you can have that it varies inversely with the square of your distance. Similarly, you can have a cylindrical wavefront. So if you have a line or linear or slit type of source, okay, if you have a slit as the source, which will be prominent in the future, we'll see that there are cylindrical wavefronts, okay, and your amplitude varies inversely with the root of your distance. Similarly, you have the plane wavefronts. Okay, this is due to extended large source situated at very large distance. How does this come into the picture? So you have these spherical wavefronts due to, let's say, this point source S. Now, if I keep on increasing, this, if this was my source, and these are my different wavefronts that are possible. So at a very large distance, the circle or the sphere will be so large that we will only be able to experience something in this range. So in this range, it seems as if the wavefront is almost straight. Okay, at a very large distance. At a very large distance, the wavefront will become something close to straight. So that is what we are talking about when I say that there is a extended large source situated at a very large distance. So you have plane wavefronts. So let's say what happens in a plane wavefront. You have a plane wavefront. At each point, you will have these spherical wavelets, and then let's say I'll just make these two. So again, you make one, you get a plane wavefront again. So in this travels like this. Your amplitude is constant here, and your intensity is also constant here. Okay. With this in mind, I'll just talk to you about what a ray of light actually meant. So the path of the light energy from one point to another is known as the ray of light. Now we have already talked about wavefronts here. So if I draw a line uh, at the right angles to the wavefront, normal to the wavefront, okay, then this will give me the, first of all, the different arrows will give me the propagation or the direction of propagation of light. Okay, because light is composed of these waves propagating in the medium. So if I just make these perpendicular lines or a perpendicular lines here as well, I'll see that this is the direction of propagation. Okay, with this in mind, we can now go and look at what interference is. So when two light waves of the same frequency, so first of all, frequency needs to be the same. So when two light waves of the same frequency with zero initial phase difference or constant phase difference superimpose over each other, then the resultant amplitude in the region of superposition is different from the amplitude of individual waves. This modification in intensity in the region of superimposition is known as interference. You can have two types of interference. First of all, there can be a constructive interference and a destructive interference. So we'll talk to you about these in detail so soon. But to briefly tell you about them, in constructive interference, what do we have? We have uh, the intensity. The resultant intensity of two waves at a point is greater than the sum of the individual intensities. And the destructive case, you have the resultant intensity is less than the sum of the individual intensities of two waves. Okay. With this in hand, we can look at the types of sources that are there. So first of all, there are coherent sources and incoherent sources. And what is a coherent source? So you have the coherent, so I'll just explain the coherent source. So two sources are said to be coherent if they emit light waves of the same wavelength and start with the same or have same phase or have a constant phase difference. So same lambda Okay, and start with same phase or constant phase difference. Note that laser is a source of monochromatic light waves of high degree of coherence. So you will often hear the terms monochromatic whenever you're concerned about interference. Two main points that you should notice: they are obtained from the same single source, and their state of polarization is always the same. If you look at incoherent sources, then I have the incoherent sources, and what happens here? Two independent monochromatic sources which emit the waves of the same wavelength. Okay, but the waves are not in phase, so they are incoherent. So the condition is waves not being in phase. And why does this happen? Because the atoms cannot emit light waves in the same phase, and these resources are said to be incoherent sources. So by using two independent laser beams, it can be possible to record the interference pattern. Okay, this is one of the cases. But let's look at how can you obtain the different kinds of uh, coherent sources. So it can be done by division of wavefront or by division of amplitude. So in the division of wavefront case that I've shown to you here, so in this method, the wavefront is divided into two or more parts by use of mirrors, lenses, or prisms. The example that you will look in the chapter is the Young's double slit experiment, the Lloyd's mirror, and the Fresnel's biprism. So what happens is you actually have an original source, and then it falls on two slits which act as sources, two different sources, and then they intersect or they superimpose on each other at a point P. Similarly here also you have two sources, you have a mirror, and upon reflection there is interference. The next way is by the division of amplitude. So what happens here is division of amplitude. It's not that important from the point of view of the examination. Example is Newton's rings. So the amplitude of the incoming beam is divided into two or more parts by partial reflection or refraction. Okay, you have the interferometers, Michelson interferometers. You have interference on thin soap films or oil films. These are all part of the division of amplitude. Okay, now I've already showed you how this actually happens. This is the case for your incoherent source, because you have two different lamps L1 and L2, so they are non-coherent, so the phase will never be equal, and that is why you will not be able to get interference when you use these. So there are, before analyzing what interference actually means, there are some conditions for to get a sustained interference. To get a stationary interference pattern, there are certain conditions that I'll talk to you about. The first one is that the two sources must be coherent. So the two sources must be coherent. What do you mean by coherent? That they should be vibrating in the same phase, or there should be a constant phase difference between them. So whenever I'm talking about these, I'm talking about two waves, same phase or constant phase difference. The next is that the two sources must emit continuously waves of same wavelength and frequency. So lambda and mu must be same. The next point says that the separation between the two coherent sources must be small. Separation between sources is small. Also, the distance of the screen from the two sources should be small. So distance between source and screen should be small. You should also note that to get good contrast between the maximas and minimas, the amplitudes of the two interfering waves should be as nearly equal as possible and the background should be dark. Okay. With this in hand, we can move on to analyzing interference, and this is where you will learn how to do the questions in the examinations. So when two light waves having the same frequency and equal or nearly equal amplitudes are moving in the same direction, they will superimpose on each other, and at some point the intensity of light is maximum and at some point it is minimum. This phenomena will be known as your interference. So in order to get a understanding of it, you must always take two displacements. For example, let's say y1 is equal to a1 sine omega t and y2 is equal to a2 sine omega t plus phi. You take these two as the two disturbances that you have, and then you have something known as the principle of superposition. So you just write this as the net amplitude is equal to y1 plus y2, which will give me the summation of these two, which is nothing but a1 sine omega t plus a2 sine omega t plus phi. Now I can easily split sine of a plus b using the mathematical identity to write this as a1 sine omega t plus a2 into sine omega t cos phi plus cos omega t sin phi. Okay. And this can be easily written as sine omega t into a1 plus a2 cos phi plus cos omega plus omega t into sin phi into a2. Okay. With this in hand, let me say that a1 plus a2 cos phi is nothing but a into cos theta, and a2 sin phi is nothing but a into sin theta. With this in mind, I can write that my y or the amplitude is nothing but a sin omega t cos theta plus a cos omega t sin theta is nothing but a sin omega t plus theta. Okay. So what are the thing that you get from here? First of all, the resultant amplitude when two waves superimpose, it is nothing but the root of the individual amplitude square 2a1 a2 cos phi, where phi is the phase between the two. You can also write that the phase angle theta between them is nothing but tan inverse of a2 sin phi by a1 plus a2 cos phi. These are all essential results, that is why I am trying to derive them here. We will not be looking at many of the derivations in the future, but these are essential, that is why these are required right now, because sometimes they ask you to find all these quantities, and then you should know that intensity is proportional to amplitude square. Okay, so I have that when two waves interfere, I have I intensity is equal to I1 plus I2 plus 2 times root I1 root I2 2 times root I1 root of I2 into cos of the phase between them. So I'll mark this as the first equation, this as the second equation, and this as the third important equation. Note that this last factor 2 root I1 root I2 cos y is known as the interference factor. Okay. Now we come to what the other quantities are. So for doing this we need a small diagram which I've tried to make here. So here I just talk to you about what is the amplitude, what is the angle that you'll get, your intensity and amplitude variation, your value for I. Okay, mark these all as important. Next is the concept of your path difference. So I've constructed a small diagram for you. Okay, so if S is the source and there are 2 points, let's say A and B, then if the distance of the source from the 2 points A and B is x1 and x2, then the path difference is nothing but x2 minus x1 between these 2 points. Okay. Now the path difference can be written in terms of the angle. How is that done? Phi, or the phase between them, or this is known as path difference. Note that this is known as phase difference. So the phase difference between the 2 points is nothing but 2 pi divided by lambda into your path difference. Okay, this is a definition that you should remember. Then you have something known as the time difference. So delta t is equal to phi by 2 pi into small time t. Therefore you can easily have a relation between all these. So let me call phase difference as my quantity, part difference as the quantity A, phase difference as the quantity B, not being these, and time difference as the quantity C. Then I can see that B by 2 pi is equal to A by lambda is equal to C by T, or I can write this as phi by 2 pi is equal to delta by lambda is equal to delta T by T. But the important thing that I really want you to remember from here is what is the definition of path difference. It right now in this example they were on the same line as A and B. Okay, there can be a condition when these points are separated, let's say A and let's say B. So what will be the path difference between them? If I draw straight lines between these two, then the actual extra distance, let's say this is the extra, if this is equal to this, then the extra distance that we are left with will be the path difference. If you multiply the path difference by a factor of 2 pi by lambda, you will get the phase difference. This will be valid for most of the things that we'll see later. So this concept must be remembered. So there are different types of interference that I talked to you about. First is the constructive interference. Next is the destructive interference. So again, revisiting constructive interference, we say that when both the waves are in the same phase, we have a constructive interference. That implies your phase difference, or that was denoted by phi. So your phase difference for this condition should be an even multiple of pi. So it should be equal to 2n pi, where n is equal to 0, 1, 2, and so on. So condition for phase difference is this. This happens when the path difference is an even multiple of lambda by 2. So your path difference is an even multiple of lambda by 2. Why is this so? Because the relation between phi and lambda is phi by 2 pi is equal to delta by lambda. Okay, then I can easily write that delta is equal to 2n times lambda by 2. Okay, so keeping this aside, these are the two conditions that must be valid. Okay, You can even write this in terms of the time difference. So time difference must be an even multiple of t by 2. So time difference is equal to 2 times t by 2. In these conditions, what do you get? You get that the amplitude is maximum. It is equal to a1 plus a2, and the intensity maximum is I1 plus I2 plus 2 root I1 I2 into cos phi. But this time, because phi is an even multiple of pi, I'll get this to be equal to just 2 into, sorry, this just the whole square of root I1 plus I2. Okay, this should be remembered because sometimes they directly ask you about the maximum intensity. Next is the case of destructive interference. This happens when both the waves are in the opposite phase. So phase difference is an odd multiple of pi. So here the phase difference is equal to 2n minus 1 into pi, where n can go from 1, 2, 3 and so on. Similarly, you can write what will be the path difference. So path difference will again be an odd multiple of pi or odd multiple of lambda by 2. Sorry. Similarly, you can write the same for time difference. Time difference will be a odd multiple of t by 2. Note these conditions are quite useful, and in this case what will you have? You will have that your a minimum is equal to a1 minus a2, and your intensity minimum is equal to the whole square of root I1 minus root I2. These are quite essential, and I'll talk to you about some of the key points here. First of all, what is the ratio between Imax and Imin? It is equal to root I1 plus I2 square by root I1 minus I2 square, which is nothing but a1 plus a2 divided by a1 minus a2 whole square, or a max by a min whole square. So sometimes you will be given one of these and you will be able to find the rest of them. You should also look at what is the definition of average intensity. It is defined as the maximum intensity plus the minimum intensity divided by 2, or I1 plus I2 is equal to a1 square plus a2 square. You should also take a note that intensity is proportional to the width of the slit. When we will be talking about Young's double slit experiment, you will look at this. So intensity is proportional to the width of the slit, and which is proportional to the amplitude square. So intensity is proportional to W is proportional to A square, or you have a simple relation between them. This will be useful when they give you questions in which they change the width of the slits and they ask you how does the intensity vary. Next, there is a quantity known as the fringe visibility defined by V, which is given by Imax minus Imin by Imax plus Imin into 100%. So when Imin is equal to 0, when Imin is 0, then fringe visibility is maximum. That is, when both slits are of equal width, then the fringe visibility is the best. So this is best when both fringes are of equal width. With this in mind, we can move on to the next section, which is the Young's double slit experiment. So in this question, you are given the condition that on a hot summer night, the refractive index of air is smallest near the ground, and it decreases with height from the ground. So you have the ground right over here. It's given that mu increases like this. So if the mu is increasing like this, so you can easily say that whether the velocity of light increases in the opposite sense. Okay, because in a denser medium, light has less velocity. Also, mu is equal to c by v, so this should be clear to you. Okay. Now, when a light beam is directed horizontally, the Huygens principle leads us to conclude that as it travels, the light beam does which of these four? Bends toward downwards, bends upwards, becomes narrower, or goes horizontally without any deflection. Okay. So first of all, you can eliminate the fourth option because you know that there is different mu's at different heights, so it's either going to bend upwards or it's going to bend downwards. So let's see how this really happens. So let me say these are the different, although it's really continuous, let me make these as discrete, mu2, mu3, mu4, with mu4 greater than mu3 greater than mu2 greater than mu1. Okay, now with this in mind, what we see is, because the velocity is decreasing downwards, so for the first case, which is for mu1, in the same time t, my light beam will travel, let's say, a distance this much. So for the second case, because the speed is lesser than this, light beam will travel a distance mu2. For the third case, my light beam will travel a distance which is less, and fourth case even lesser in the same time t. So if I see it from one of the ends, it seems as if my light beam is bending towards the up direction. Okay, you can also see it from the perspective of bending of light rays at different points. So let's say this is my horizontal beam of light, that is a horizontal beam of light that is coming in. Now, as you know, even if the horizontal beam comes in at some position, each point will act as a source of wavefront. Now, because in for this each point, there is a different refractive index on the top and there is a different refractive index on the bottom. So the propagation of energy on both the sides will be different. Okay, and as you know that if mu1 is less than mu2, then if I have a light ray that is coming in like this, it will bend towards the normal. Okay, if mu2 is going like this, so it will bend towards the normal. Similarly, if it goes like this and hits the other one, it will bend further towards the normal. So what is really happening? If my light ray goes like this, it will start bending towards the normal. Okay, and it will bend upwards. Let's take a look at another question. Two beams of light having intensities I and 4i interfere to produce a fringe pattern on a screen. The phase difference between the beam is pi by 2 at the point A and 2 pi at the point B. And find out the difference between the resultant intensities at A and B. So let's see what happens at A. I have an interference. So my net intensity, let's say I star, is equal to I plus 4i plus 2 root I1 root I2 to cos phi. Okay, so I1 is nothing but I, so 2 root I. This nothing, next is 4i, so it's root of I into root of 4i, which is nothing but root of I. I have taken the 2 outside, so it becomes 4 into root of I into root of I, which gives me 4i into cos phi. Now the phase difference between them is given by pi by 2 at the point A. So cos of 90 is equal to 0. So that implies this term goes to 0. So I have pi y as the intensity. At the point B, my resultant is what? It is I plus 4i plus 2 cos phi root I1 is I and I2 is 4i. Okay. Now at this point, the cos pi is equal to 2 pi. Sorry, phi is equal to 2 pi. Now for phi is equal to 2 pi, what do you have? You have that cos phi is equal to 1. As you can remember, this is 0, this is pi, and this is 2 pi. So 2 pi coincides with 0. So that value is equal to 1, cos phi becomes 1. I root I into root 4i becomes 2 into I. it multiplies with 2 gives you 4i. So totally you have I plus 4i plus 4i, which is 9i, and you are supposed to find the difference between the resultant intensities. So it is 9i minus 4i, 9i minus 5i, sorry, 9i minus 5i, nothing but 4 times I. Let's take a look at another question. The intensity variation in the interference pattern obtained with the help of two coherent sources is 5% of the average intensity. Find out the ratio of intensity of the two sources. So in order to do this, let me assume that the average intensity is, let's say, 100. Then it's given that there is a 5% variation. So I can write that my maximum intensity is 100 plus 5 and minimum intensity is 100 minus 5. Now I can write my Imax by my Imin is nothing but 105 by 95 is equal to 21 by 19. That implies in terms of amplitudes, I can easily write this as A1 plus A2 divided by A1 minus A2. These are the amplitudes of the two waves. It's equal to 21 by 19. That implies that I can write A1 plus A2 divided by A1 minus A2 to be equal to root of 21 by 19 is equal to 1.05. That implies A1 plus A2 is equal to 1.05 times A1 minus 1.05 times A2. Now I can easily solve this, giving me A1 by A2 is equal to 2.05 by 2.05 divided by 0.05, which is 41 by 1. Okay, therefore I1 by I2 is equal to A1 square by A2 square, nothing but 1680 divided by 1. So I've picked up this question just to tell you about some facts. So in this question, of the four choices given, after the statements, choose the one that best describes the two statements. First statement is given, David German experiment established the wave nature of electrons. Second is, if electrons have wave nature, they can interfere and show diffraction. So I want to tell you that the answer for this is 1, which is statement 1 is true and statement 2 is true and statement 2 is the correct explanation for statement 1. So you should always remember this. These are two facts. We did not discuss them in the theory, but David Germer experiment is two electrons. What your Young's double slit experiment was too light. It just established the wave nature of electrons. Also, if electrons have a wave nature, they can interfere and show diffraction. So you now know that in electrons, just like light, can show both these properties. So the Young's double slit experiment actually proved that light is a wave. So what they did is they took S to be a narrow slit which was illuminated by a monochromatic source of light. Now this will set out wavefronts and send waves in the front direction, okay, which is shown to you. These are propagating in this direction. Okay, now there are two slits, slit S1 and slit S2. These two slits will become the source of the secondary wavelets, so they will emanate wavelets of their own, okay, in the forward direction. Okay, these waves are superimposed on each other and these give rise to interference. So we can look at any point and the waves will be coming from the point S1 and there will be waves coming in from the point S2, and we'll see what happens at that point. So this at this point P. So first of all, I'll talk to you about the central point, which is O. So what do you see in interference, which has been shown right over here? There are alternate dark and bright bands on the screen, so which is at a certain distance from the plane of the slits S1 and S2. This distance will be denoted by capital D. Also, you should note that the central fringe is always bright due to the path from S1O and S2O being equal. Because this path is equal, so the path difference is equal between these two waves, and if the path sorry, the path difference is 0. If the path difference is 0, you get a maxima. Okay. So basically on the screen you'll get things like these, where there is a bright fringe, then a dark fringe, a bright, a dark, a bright, a dark. So bright means constructive interference has happened, dark means destructive interference has happened. You should note that energy is always conserved in interference. Okay. And some key points that you should note from this experiment that are essential for the examination are: first of all, if one of the two slits is closed, then the interference pattern will disappear. It will just show that two coherent sources are required to produce interference pattern. Also, if white light is used as a parent source, then the fringes will be colored and of unequal width. So if white light is used, then central fringe will be white. Central is white. Okay. Now, as the wavelength of violet color is least, as lambda or wavelength of violet is the least, so fringe nearest to either side of the central fringe is violet. Fringe nearest to either side of the central fringe will be violet. This should be kept in mind because these come as factual questions often. And the farthest from the center will be red. So you will have on the screen, if this is the screen, this is the central position, this will be white, then you will have violet, and then you will have all the colors, and then you will have red over here. So first let's look at the conditions for bright and dark fringe. Talk about the bright fringe first. So you'll be given in the question the distance d, which is the distance between the slit and screen. You'll be given the distance small d, which is the distance between the two slits S1 and S2, or basically the distance between the two sources for my interference pattern. Okay. Now bright fringe occurs due to constructive interference, and because we know that for constructive interference the path difference should be even multiple of lambda by 2. How will you find the path difference? You make these two lines S1p and S2p, and then you just make this perpendicular from S1p to S2p, so that these two become equal. So whatever is remaining is your path difference. So my path difference is nothing but PS2 minus PS1, which I have given here as S2L, and this should be equal to 2n times lambda by 2 because of constructive interference. Okay. Now if you just take the triangle PCO here, if you look at this figure, the triangle P, C and O, if you take this triangle, okay, from this triangle you can very easily see that tan theta is nothing but xn by d. What was xn? Xn was the distance of the point, let's say P, where we are looking for in the interference pattern from the center. Okay, so tan theta is equal to xn by d, and in the triangle S1 S2L, I'll show you the triangle again. In the triangle S1 S2 and L, this triangle, in this triangle sin theta is nothing but delta by d. Delta was the path difference. Okay, now delta is equal to n lambda for bright fringes from here. So therefore if theta is small, I can write tan theta to be equal to sin theta. If the theta is small, that implies xn by d. In some notes you will find xn to be written as y, because this is in the x direction, this is in the y direction. So xn by d is nothing but delta by small d. This is what you must remember for both the cases, whether it is constructive or it is destructive. So xn by d is equal to lambda by small d, or the distance of the nth bright fringe from the central bright fringe is known as, the distance from the central bright fringe is n times d lambda by d. So this must be extremely clear to you. Next we talk about the case for dark fringes. So what happens in dark fringes? Dark fringes occur due to destructive interference. So because for destructive interference, your path difference must be an odd multiple of lambda by 2. Okay. So the distance of the mth dark fringe from the central bright fringe is given by xm is nothing but 2m minus 1 into d lambda by 2 times d. So this is the third equation that you should definitely remember from this. Next comes something known as the fringe width. Now I have given you the interference pattern on the screen on the right. Now the distance between two successive bright or dark fringes is known as the fringe width. So my beta, which is the fringe width, is nothing but distance between the n plus 1th and the nth bright fringe. Okay, or the dark fringe also we can do the same thing as well. So I can write this as n plus 1 into d lambda by small d minus n d lambda by small d. So fringe width comes out to be d lambda by small d. Okay, this should be noted as well because direct questions often come from here. Uh, then as you can see, there is something known as uh, the angular fringe width. So what does that imply? So my angular fringe width, which is alpha, is nothing but my beta divided by d. Okay, my fringe width divided by the distance between the source and the screen. Okay, and because beta by d is nothing but lambda by small d, so alpha can be written as lambda divided by small d. Okay, you should note that distance of the nth bright fringe from the central fringe is nothing but n lambda d by d is equal to n beta. So xn can be written in terms of this angular fringe width is equal to n times beta. Similarly, distance between n1 and n2 bright fringes, so xn2 minus xn2 minus xn1 is nothing but n2 minus n1 into beta. You can have the distance of the nth dark fringe from the central fringe as well. So for the dark fringe, you have xm is equal to 2n minus 1 into d lambda by 2 times d, which is nothing but 2n minus 1 into beta by 2. Similarly, you can find the distance of the nth bright fringe from the mth dark fringe as well in terms of these. Some key points that you should note: first of all, these equations that I've already told you about, these equations are extremely important. Okay, but the other things that you should notice that sometimes is asked in the paper. First of all, if the whole apparatus is immersed in a liquid of refractive index mu, then the wavelength of light will change. So your wavelength will become lambda by mu in a medium. Okay, and since mu is greater than 1, so lambda prime will be less than lambda, which will imply your wavelength will decrease. Now if the wavelength is decreasing, that implies your fringe width, which was proportional to lambda, will decrease. Okay. Even the angular fringe width, which was beta by d, will also decrease. Sorry, beta by d will also decrease. Yes. Also, what happens with the increase in distance between the slit and the screen d? So if you increase the distance, the angular width of maxima does not change, but the fringe v beta increases linearly with d, and the intensity of fringes decreases. Also, if an additional phase difference of pi is created in one of the waves, then the central fringe becomes dark. So I'll just write these points because they often try to confuse you with these. So if additional phase difference pi is there in one of the waves, then what will happen? You will have that central becomes dark. Okay, why is this so? Because at the end we are concerned about the phase difference between the two. Okay, and even though you got your values through the path difference, after you get your path difference and you try to find the phase difference corresponding to that, if there is already a phase difference between the two incoming rays or the two incoming waves, sorry, then you, let's say my phase difference due to the difference of paths was phi naught, and there was an initial phase difference of some phi prime, then the net phase difference will be what I need to equate with either 2n times uh, your value, your 2n times, or my 2n minus 1 times the value that I have for constructive and destructive interferences that is there in the system. Now I will use this question to introduce another important formula that we did not discuss in the discussion part. So the important formula is as follows. My intensity of any peak is given by I naught into cos square of phi by 2, where I naught is equal to the maximum intensity, okay, and phi is equal to your phase phase difference. Okay, how does this? First of all, you should definitely note this down, and we'll see how this works in this question. In the Young's double slit experiment using a monochromatic light of wavelength lambda, the path difference in terms of an integer n corresponding to any point having half the peak intensity is. So you are given that I max divided by 2, which is half the peak intensity, is equal to I max into cos square. And what is phi? Phi is equal to 2 pi by lambda into your delta. Delta was your path difference. So in some books you will find delta to be written as delta x. You can use any notation. Okay. So cos square, I have pi by lambda into, I'll be using delta as my notation. With this I can easily write that cos square pi by lambda into delta is equal to 1 by 2, or cos pi by lambda into delta is equal to plus minus 1 by root 2. That implies I can easily write that pi by lambda into delta is equal to n pi plus minus pi by 4. This will easily give me that my delta is nothing but n plus minus 1 by 4 into lambda. Okay, so this is your answer. So let's look at a question. In a Young's double slit experiment, slits are separated by 0.5 millimeter and the screen is placed at a distance 150 centimeter away. So we'll quickly draw this. Here, this distance is 0.5 millimeter and distance here, which is known as d, this is known as small d, this is 150 centimeter. Okay, this is your screen. Now it's written that a beam of light consisting of two wavelengths, 650 nanometer and 520 nanometer. Let me call the first wavelength as 650, second one as 520, is used to obtain interference fringes on the screen. The least distance from the common central maximum, so let this be the common central maximum. Okay, so we need to find the least distance of the common center of maximum to the point where the bright fringes due to both the wavelengths coincide. So let that point be P, where the bright fringes due to both the maximums are coinciding. So that implies at the point P, there is a maximum for the first wavelength also, there is a maximum for the second wavelength also. Okay. So what this implies is that n1 into lambda 1 is equal to n2 into lambda 2. Okay. Because this is the condition for for both to have the common maxima there. Now I can easily write that n1 by n2 is equal to lambda 2 by lambda 1 is nothing but 520 by 650 is equal to 4 by 5. Okay. Now because they have asked for the least distance, so for the least distance I can easily write that n1 is equal to 4, n2 is equal to 5. Okay, this is for the least distance. This ratio can be expanded to other values as well. Now with this in hand, I have my equation for a maxima which says that xn, what is xn? Xn is this. In some literature you will find this to be written as y as well, so you can use whatever you want to use. So y is nothing but, sorry, y into, I have xn into small d divided by capital D. Okay, it's nothing but, or I can write this as y into d by d, whatever you are comfortable with. This is equal to n lambda for a maxima to happen. Okay, this is the condition. Now I can easily write my y to be equal to n lambda by d into small d on top. Okay, in this in hand I can easily substitute, let's say my value for n1, so that gives me 4 into 650 into 10 to the power minus 9 into 1.5 divided by 0.5 into 10 to the power minus 3, which gives me the value as 7.8 into 10 to the power minus 3 meter is equal to 7.8 millimeter. Let's look at the next question. Young's double slit experiment is carried out by using green, red and blue light, one color at a time. The fringe widths recorded and beta are beta G, beta R and beta B respectively. Then which of these following is true? So as you know that beta or a fringe width, I use the notation for angular width there, so I'll just say the fringe width is nothing but d into lambda by d. Okay, and as you know that lambda r is greater than lambda a, lambda r is greater than lambda of g is greater than lambda of b. Therefore, beta r will be greater than beta of g will be greater than beta of b.